Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of The Snake Pit. I'm your host, Son of Bat, and today I'll be talking about Brainscan. Released in 1994, Brainscan is a science fiction horror movie directed by John Flynn, with a screenplay by Andrew Kevin Walker, story by Brian Owens, and produced by Michael Roy. The film stars Edward Furlong, Frank Langella, Amy Hargreaves, T. Ryder Smith, cinematography by Francois Protate, edited by Jay Cassidy, music by George S. Clinton. Production companies Admire Productions and Coral Productions, distributed by Triumph Films, and released on April 22nd, 1994, with a box office return of $4,352,000. I couldn't find any exact confirmation for how much this movie was made for, but the general consensus seems to be that it was made for about $8 million. So it's definitely not a blockbuster, and it definitely didn't make its money back, but it's still a great film that I feel is super underrated. Not enough people talk about it. And I think in part that has to do with the decade that this movie came out in. Most old school horror fans or purists or whatever you want to call it seem to think the 1990s is the absolute worst decade for horror films, or like the beginning of the end, or whatever you want to call it. But I don't really think that's true. I think if you look past the the Scream movies, the Miramax post-Scream shit and like all that stuff, you'll find some really cool, unique horror movies. Definitely not the worst years of horror. I think that title is more applicable to the mid 2000s to about now, but that's a whole different video and a whole different topic for another day. There will be minor spoiler warnings for this film. I'll try not to go too deep into it because it's a really interesting movie. I think more of you should check out, but also just, if you want to watch this movie, just pause the review and come back to it later. So yeah, there's your warning. We're going to jump into this right now. Our story follows Michael Brower, who, from the get-go, we can tell is not altogether well. A few years before the movie, we seen a flashback that his mother was killed in a car crash and his leg was left severely injured. He lives in this giant house at the end of a cul-de-sac, but his dad's never home. He's always out on business, so he pretty much just isolates himself in his room, watching horror movies, listening to heavy metal, and playing video games. All that cool shit. He doesn't really have any friends because everyone thinks he's like an outsider, but he's got one really cool friend named Kyle who's got the same interests. And these two had really good chemistry in this movie, and, just reminded me of me and my friends at that age, and, it was pretty cool. Then we get introduced to Kimberly, the girl next door that he has a crush on, and this is where Michael's weirdness starts coming out. Instead of, maybe talking to her or anything, or just being normal and shy, he spies on her with video cameras and telescopes, which, this kind of comes into what happens later, but really weird shit to start off with, but okay. Doesn't really have a lot going for him except for this horror club at school, which the principal absolutely fucking hates. He confiscates one of the tapes actually in this scene, and he's like grilling him on like, what were you showing them? And he's like, oh, death, death, death. And then the principal sighs, and then he's like, part 2. And then the principal releases a bigger sigh out of frustration, and then he's like asking him, why would you watch this kind of stuff? What kind of people watches this like sick, disgusting stuff? Like the typical authoritative bullshit that adults, hit you when you're a high school kid trying to like watch or listen to cool shit. I mean, at least with me, I could relate. I had this exact lecture and conversation happen a bunch of times. I still kind of get it. Every so often, a bundle of sticks comes up and they try to hit you with this shit, and you're just like, dude, it's not that deep. They're just fucking fun movies. It's just cool shit. It's cooler than the shit you're into, at least. But anyway, I digress. Through reading the magazine Fangoria, also known as Fango, Kyle tells Michael about this video game that's supposed to be the scariest of them all, and Michael kind of disbelieves him because he's like, I've played them all, they're not that great, but this game promises to be something else. It's basically like an augmented reality type game. So, he orders a copy, and when he puts the game in, we meet our main antagonist that we'll see a lot more of later, named Trickster. And he tells him that there's going to be hypnotic suggestion, kind of stuff that will screw with reality. And, once he gets sucked into the game, he's told that he has to basically act like a psycho killer, murder the target, and take a trophy. In this case, he has to remove the body's foot. And he wakes up, like almost seems to be like snapped out of it, out of a trance, wakes up, and he's like, whoa, that was like some really realistic shit. That was the most intense game ever. And he fucking loves it. He can't wait to get the next disc in. The next day rolls around, you find out somebody in the neighborhood's been murdered and their foot's been removed. So Michael starts getting really paranoid. He can't tell if it was a game or if it's real. And this is a theme that comes up in the movie. More discs come in and they kind of like, there's like the second one, he's got to kill a witness. The third one, he's got to clean up evidence. So it's like murders and evidence cleaning. And it's very real, or at least we think it's very real. And eventually the trickster even comes out of the TV and starts tormenting Michael in the real world. He's a pretty funny guy. He's wild. He's got this giant like mohawk. He's like a punk rock alien demon, He eats junk food. He says some pretty funny one-liners, pretty corny one-liners. He shows Edward Furlong some music from his home realm, which is fucking Primus. It's hilarious shit. But, in between all this, Kyle keeps asking Michael about the game, and he wants to play it because he knows it's intense. And then Michael, like, shrugs it off. This results into a huge fight. And basically by tape 2, we don't see what happens on tape 2, but after CD2, after CD2 goes in, and Michael wakes up the next day, he finds out Kyle's dead. And that was like, for a little science fiction slasher B movie, it was a pretty bummy scene. It was pretty like deep, like this guy's only friend is dead. Then suddenly Kimberly comes around and she's only using his story for an article in the high school paper. But something else that keeps coming up is every time one of these murders or evidence cleanups goes down, there's a detective named Detective Hayden, played by Frank Langella, and he's investigating these murders. And every time something happens, Edward Furlong further incriminates himself by going to the scene of the crime, and the cop starts noticing him more and more. So we got a cat and mouse developing between Eddie and Frank here. And, it's pretty intense shit. And this all culminates with the trickster telling him that he has to kill Kimberly, and he's got to do all this stuff, and he's getting really close to the cop coming to kill him. And he pretty much relents and doesn't kill her, and gets shot by the cop. And then, spoiler alert, he wakes up. The whole thing was a video game the whole time. He was in a trance. He only ever played the first game, which I remember when I showed my buddy this movie, the first thing he screamed was just bullshit. Like, he was like, there's no fucking way none of that movie just happened. And I mean, the first time I saw it, it got me. I was like, yo, that's pretty wild. Like, a lot of people get pissed off by shit like that, but I didn't really mind it. And what results in happening next is Michael he meets up with Kyle, and he's really happy he's not dead, and he decides to finally go next door and not be a creep and actually talk to Kimberly the right way. And we get our ending like in true 90s fashion with grunge music blasting in the background. And I personally like really fuck with this movie. There's a lot of aspects about it I like. I fucking love the soundtrack. It's all metal, grunge, punk. It's just a really, really good soundtrack. The actors all did their jobs. I think Edward Furlong was good. Apparently John Flynn did not like Edward Furlong. He really liked T. Ryder Smith, who played the trickster. And I mean, he was a really good actor, but he basically said Edward Furlong was a 15-year-old kid who couldn't act. You had to, quote, slap him awake every morning. And he's like, I don't want to get into knocking people, but I wasn't a big fan of Edward Furlong, which is kind of like, shooting yourself in the foot, because you're like, I don't want to talk shit. And then you like proceed to talk shit, which again makes no sense to me, because I think he was really good in this movie. I think everyone was really good. His fucking Edward Furlong's room in this movie, his fucking horror cave it's the shit to aspire to. It was fucking lit. He's got like these sick old school posters everywhere. He's got like games and tapes everywhere. It's literally like my room, but like better. And there's just so much about this movie I love. I remember I bought it. I bought the Lionsgate DVD that you'll see in the picture there. And the guy, when I was buying it, he kept trying to like almost try to convince me not to pick it up. He kept telling me how bad it was and how he saw it when it came out. And he kept referring to it as like a Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff, I think because of the Trickster. But I don't think that's really a fair argument. The Trickster is nothing like Freddy Krueger. Like, sure, he's kind of like a demon thing, and he's like got one-liners. But apart from that, there's no real similarity to this movie. This one's about video games and shit, about altered reality. And funny enough, I said earlier, it was a science fiction film. Some people consider this a slasher film, but this is like more so science fiction, but not in the traditional sense, because it's not about space, it's not about time travel or aliens or anything like that. It's about augmented reality, VR, that kind of shit, which is pretty wild because, Oculus and all those sets coming out now. It's just one of the many many things that shows the negatives to, I guess, augmented reality. It gave me Lawnmower Man vibes, especially with like the CGI, which that's another fucking cool movie I want to cover at some point. But like, if you like stuff like Lawnmower Man, if you like 90s like kind of cheesy horror movies with metal soundtracks and like early CG, can't go wrong with this movie. Again, super underrated. Not enough people talk about it, I find. There's not many videos discussing it. Well, there may be more now, especially because, like I said, there's the Blu-ray re-release that came out not that long ago. But yeah, I definitely think this is one that everyone should check out. It's not like it's super deep movie either. It's just one of those things that you can throw on, smoke a couple blunts, sit back and enjoy it. Like, it's got some, like I said, deep moments, like when the friend dies. It's got some really tense fucking cat and mouse between Frank Langella and Edward Furlong. Like, they both played their parts well as the misfit who may be a psycho and the cop who's getting ever more suspicious about the kid. Obviously it shows its budget in some places. It's not like a AAA movie, but it's still not bad. Like, it's fucking really, really good in my opinion. It's supposed to take place in New Jersey, but it's filmed in Montreal. I mean, I don't think many people would really notice that, but I think it's cool. A lot of these horror movies that take place in America usually end up getting filmed up here in Canada, so another one to the books for us. Apparently the game was based off the computer game Brainwaves, or also known as Brain Scanners in Europe. This was only changed after the movie was released. It was a critical and financial failure, and it was actually withdrawn from cinemas after only 2 weeks, which is fucking insane to me, man. Like, it really sucks because I don't think it should have got pulled. I think it was really cool. If we're talking Elm Street clones, I'd say Bad Dreams from, I believe, 88. I want to say 88 is more of an Elm Street clone, especially because it's about like a burnt demon guy killer going after one of the chicks who's in Dream Warriors. So I feel like that argument, like I've said before, can't be made to this movie. It's got its own thing going. T. Ryder Smith, who played the Trickster. I forgot to mention there's this computer prompt that Edward Furlong has. It's kind of like a butler named Igor, and it's got like this impersonation of Boris Karloff. That was actually voiced by T. Ryder Smith, who played the Trickster, but it doesn't get credited. I always thought that was pretty cool because I honestly thought it was just a computer program the first time I saw it, and I, to be honest, wanted to set something like that up on my computer. There's like a lot of cool posters in their rooms for like Aerosmith and like, Metallica and all those like sick bands and shit. Definitely a really cool movie. I highly recommend this one. I'd probably, if I'd have to rate this on personal enjoyment, I'm probably going to give this like a straight up 10 out of 10 because every time I watch this movie, I could watch this movie maybe once every month and it would be fine. It's like just something to zone out for. Like, I could sit there, watch it high out of my mind, or I could sit there and have it in the background while I'm playing video games. It's just something I don't get sick of. The soundtrack, like I said before, is amazing. I use it when I'm playing video games. Like, I have it like a digital playlist of pretty much the whole soundtrack. I'm looking for a CD. Hopefully I'll find that one day. But there's a lot going for this movie. Like, the CG, while it doesn't look great, it just lends to that almost psychedelic, trippy feel that I was talking about. The practical effects work, again, amazing. I wish more movies did more practical effects because this was just so cool. Like, there's scenes where he's trying to like morph with Edward Furlong and like his jaw extends like Evil Dead or Army of Darkness style. That was pretty cool. And there's actually, and you can see pictures of this online, there was supposed to be a final transformation when the Trickster merges with Michael, and this thing looked fucking horrifying. Like, I don't know why they cut this out of the movie. Apparently, like, the cast and crew loved it because of how disgusting and creepy it looked. But look pictures up of this thing. It is fucking wild. That's the only criticism I think I can think for this movie is they cut that out of the end. And I don't know why. It was fucking so grotesque and nightmare fueling. Like, they should have left that in the movie. Other than that, it is a perfect fucking 10. I highly recommend this to people who are fans of 90s horror movies, fans of video games, fans of like sci-fi horror, fans of Edward Furlong. And hey, you know what? I even just thought about this. There are some similarities in this movie to Pet Sematary 2 because, Furlong is playing a kid whose mom's dead. He's kind of edgy. There's a really good soundtrack. So fuck it. If you like Pet Sematary 2, you might like this movie because it is dark, twisted, kind of funny. And it's just one of the doper things to come out of the 90s, in my opinion. Hopefully this sells you into checking it out. I hope you guys like this episode. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe. Hopefully be putting more out soon on a more consistent schedule. But yeah, thanks for tuning into this episode. Peace.